Hey, boys and girls, it's Mr. Mack from the Harker School. Today we are going to be writing fractions as decimals. Something that we may or may not know about fractions and decimals is they both represent a part of a whole. So today we're going to be taking our fractions, some fractions, and just changing them to look a little bit different. They're still going to be worth the same value, but instead of having the fraction and the fraction bar between the numerator and the denominator, we're going to have a decimal that is going to represent, again, the same amount. It's just going to look a little bit different. One of the key things I want us to understand is when we talk about our decimal places today, okay, here are three decimal places that we talk about. This would be the tenths place. All right, T-E-N-T-H. Okay, this is the tenths. This is the hundredths. You have to remember that. Hundredths. All right, we're getting long with the writing here. I'm sorry. And I know it's not the best looking. The hundredths. And then this is the thousandths. All right. So this is going to be really important for us today because when we're talking about changing our fractions to be decimals, we're going to be talking about these three places a lot. The tenths place, the hundredths place, and the thousandths place. Because what we're going to be looking at is the tenths place is also, a tenth is 1/10. Okay, and the hundredths place is 1/100th. And then the thousandths place, is 1/1000. Okay, so when we look at this, this is going to be important because these denominators are going to be what we're trying to get today when we're making our equivalent fractions. Okay, so first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a fraction, and then we're going to be creating an equivalent fraction with one of these denominators, 10, 100, or 1,000. Let me get into an example. It might be a little bit easier for you to understand. All right, so it says the average weight of a tennis racket is 2/5 pound. Write this as a decimal. So we had 2/5. We want to create a equivalent fraction with either 10, 100, or 1,000 as the denominator. All right. So for a 5, we know we can get from 5 to 10 for our denominator if we multiply by 2. So 5 times 2 is 10. And whatever you do to the denominator, you have to do to the numerator. So 2 times 2 is 4. So now we have 4 tenths. 4 tenths means we have a 4 in the tenths place, right? So when we say that, we're saying 4 tenths, okay? 2/5 is the same as 4/10, which is equal to 4 tenths, a 4 in the tenths place. All right, so again, when we look at our chart down here, we have 0 ones because there's no whole number, and there is a 4 in the tenths place. So 0 and 4 tenths is what this fraction looks like as a decimal. Some of us might look at that and think, 2/5, how is that equal to 4 tenths as a decimal? Well, this is the process you have to think about. Getting your fraction to have a denominator of 10, 100, or 1,000 because those are our decimal places, all right? And then changing that fraction, 4 tenths, into the decimal 4 tenths. Okay, so this is important to remember. So if you are working at home and you're thinking of taking notes, or if you want to have something to help guide you, remember tenths place, hundredths place, thousandths place. I'm going to have to move on to our next page, and I'm going to try and leave this here for us. All right, I tried to set it up so that that would be there, and then I can just erase the little bit of work I did down here. Okay, so when we're looking at this next example, we have 3/4. Okay, 3/4 we cannot get from 4 to 10. 4 times nothing is going to get us to 10 unless we start talking about decimals and things like that. We're not worried about that right now. Okay, 4 to the 100, we can get from 4 to 100, and that's what we're showing here. Is you say, okay, well, you multiply the 4 by 25. That's going to give you 100. Okay, then you have to multiply the numerator by the same thing, 25. So 3 times 25 is going to give you 75. Okay, so when we write 75 hundredths, that means 75 ends in the hundredths place. So the decimal 7/5, because 75 ends in the hundredths place. Okay. So that's an important way to look at this. Is sometimes we've had trouble reading decimals in the past. I always say to read the whole number and then tell me what place value column it ends in. So 75 ends in the hundredths place, and we have the hundredths place listed right here. So that's the way that we can understand how to read that decimal. All right. A little more guided practice before I send you on your own to try and do this one on your own. We've got 1/5. I know I can get from 5 to 10 by multiplying by 2. So that's going to give me 2/10, which means a 2 should end in the tenths place. All right. Again, we have a 25. I can't get to 10, but I could get to 100 by multiplying by 4. So this gives me 44 over 100. So 44 has to end in the hundredths place. All right. And that's the best way to take a look at that one there. All right. I'm going to, again, erase my work here. And I'm going to try and leave everything on the side there because sometimes that's a good little guide to have when we're trying to make these fractions into decimals. All right. So here is our straightforward. Now it's up to you. You've got to do the work on your own here. Well, looking at number 3, 8/10, it already has a denominator of 10, 100, or 1,000. So 8/10 is 8 in the tenths place. Okay. We don't have to touch that. We just write that right out. The next one, though, we've got 1 over 20. Okay. So 1 over 20. If I could get from 20 to 10, I could divide by 2 and get there, but I can't divide my numerator by 2, so that's not going to work. So how do I get from 20 to 100? 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. I multiply it by 5. So if I multiply the denominator by 5 to get 100 as my denominator, okay, I have to multiply my numerator by 5 as well to get 5 over 100. Here is a tricky one because, like we said on the previous pages, 5 has to end in the hundredths place. I can't put the 5 here. I can't do that because that would be 5/10. So I need to put a 0 here and then a 5 because that 5 has to end in the hundredths place. So this would be our answer. I think the best way to do these problems, boys and girls, is to find the fraction, write the fraction, and then write it as a decimal. All right. So again, 17/20, I can get from 20 to 100 by multiplying by 5. So that gives me 100 as my denominator. And then if I multiply the numerator, by 5, that's going to give me 85. All right. So then I have 85, and it has to end in the hundredths place, and that's going to happen right there. All right. Now, when I'm looking at some of the examples that we have here, all of these are ending up in the tenths or the hundredths place. Now, could it be the thousandths place? It sure could. If you had something over 250, you might multiply that by 4 to get it to 1,000. Okay, but as long as you can understand the idea of this, you'll be fine when it comes to those thousandths problems. So what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to try 6 through 8 right now, just to see if you're able to do those. All right, so you can pause the video and try 6 through 8. Go ahead and give it a shot. And now that we're back and you've finished 6, 7, and 8, let's take a look. So 4 over 25, we have to get 25 to be equal to one of these denominators, which is going to be 100. So you multiply the denominator by 4, and you multiply the numerator by 4, and that gives you 16 over 100, which means 16 ends in the hundredths place. All right, 1 over 10, 1/10, 1 in the tenths place. You have nothing else you have to do for that one. If you changed it to be 100 by chance, you might have had this as your answer. Okay, but again, 10 over 100, still the same idea. 8/25, multiply it by 4, that gives you 100 again. All right, so then multiply by 4 on top, that gives you 32 over 100, which gives you 32 hundredths, just like that. Now, there is one other way you can do this. If your denominator is not able to go into 10, 100, or 1,000, you can also just divide. All right, so when you have 8 over 10, I'll show you the example, okay? 8 over 10, that actually means 8 divided by 10. So you drop that 8 inside the fraction here, or inside the little fraction house, some of us call it, all right? And if you were to put a decimal and a 0, you would then be able to solve this and say 10 goes into 80 8 times. 0, subtract 0, and you're done. And then you bring your decimal up. Now, that works for any fraction that you're given. Sometimes the numbers might go on for forever. Sometimes it might be 3 decimal places. But again, if you can't get a denominator to go into 10, 100, or 1,000, you could always divide. It's also another way that you can just check your work just to make sure that you are doing the problems correctly. All right. Hopefully this video helped you. There's plenty more examples here. There's going to be links and other videos that you can watch to kind of check it out and see if you are a master of this skill, which I'm sure you will be after a little bit of practice. All right. Good luck, guys. Thanks for watching.